All right, let's move on. We got Sean O'Brien with Tucker Carlson.
All right, so I cannot recommend this interview enough. It was really interesting, and it's a good example of how confusing the times that we live in are. We're not going to be showing this part, but part of the reason it's worth watching in its entirety. Tucker Carlson on his own brought up how nobody talks about the banks. We need to go after the banks. Religions have all said that usury is against God, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. So why Tucker Carlson brings up that the mafia charged a lower VIG than the credit card companies do. So there's a good example of the topsy-turvy times we live in, that you got Tucker Carlson bonding with the head of the Teamsters about the banks and the criminal usury of the credit card companies. So there's a lot of that in there. But the thing that's getting the most attention is O'Brien spilling the tea about what things look like behind the scenes with the Democratic Party. And if you as a voter feel like they shit on you, well, don't feel bad. They shit on everybody.
Right.
It's not surprising what he's revealing. It's still a little shocking just in terms of their self-interest, that they would carry themselves this way with people that they think they need, or they wouldn't be meeting with them, right? So why would you treat them this way? So here we go.
Schumer asked me to meet with him, and I meet with him, and he wants $550,000 for the super PAC for the Senate races. No problem.
This is Schumer.
Chuck Schumer asked me to meet with him, and I meet with him, and he wants $550,000 for the super PAC for the Senate races. No problem. And I said, look, I'm speaking at the RNC. He's like, oh, great job. That's good. You should represent your members. Day after I give that speech at the RNC, he gets on Twitter and starts talking shit about my speech. Remember who fixed your pensions? And I'm like, this guy's a fucking joke. Like, why would you do this? Two weeks prior, you're telling me when you're taking a $550,000 super PAC check, that's great. It's great for your members. That's good. And then you want to get on Twitter like a tough guy and, throw
Why
shit
didn't he
out
just
there.
call you?
Well, because they don't like confrontation. They don't want to hear the truth. When he said, we fixed your pensions, that gave me an opportunity to say, you're the same guy in the same party that 40 years ago embraced, endorsed, and signed off on deregulation in the trucking industry, which we lost 400,000 jobs in 1980. Ted Kennedy put the bill forward. Joe Biden signed off on it as a senator. He showed up at our building prior to the election, and we had a bipartisan meeting in the hallway of the IBT. Walks in late and he sticks his crooked finger in my face and he says, I fixed your pensions. I said, you should have. You broke them. And we get into it pretty hard. And, he starts like yelling at me. I go, buddy, listen, there's only one guy that can yell at me. We buried him 12 years ago. I go, you want to get into this right here, right now? We'll get into it.
You're talking about your dad.
Yeah, I'm talking about my dad, right? And so Schumer's like, we fixed your pension. I'm like, yeah? I'm going to name the things you haven't done for us. When our members were on strike at the rail, you didn't support us. You didn't put a letter of support in there. When we were fighting with UPS in the middle of the street, you wouldn't sign off on a support letter. When we took on Amazon, which we're taking on now, you wouldn't support our efforts in Amazon. I said, you want me to keep going? Because you can tell me what you've done, the one thing you've done for me and my union and my members, but I'm going to tell you all the things you haven't done for us. And then, he's like, well, I really want this relationship. I'm like, we're done. We're done. And that was it.
Okay, so that was quite the speech. He also mentions later on that he figured out why Schumer wouldn't support them on Amazon. I think he's got enough reasons not to anyway. Apparently, his daughter is a lobbyist for Amazon. Schumer's daughter is a lobbyist for Amazon. Well, of course it makes sense.
I think his daughter lobbying for Amazon is more a symptom of what the Democrats have become than a reason for Schumer to, not back them, right? I mean, and that conversation that he recounts there is a dramatized version. I mean, it's real. I'm not saying it's fake, but that is a dramatized sort of distillation of the relationship, the souring relationship between the unions and the Democratic Party going back as long as he said, deregulating trucking, 1980.
Right. the fact that they want to take credit for the crumbs, and that's very typical of the Democrats. Yeah,
Right.
they'll throw you a few crumbs so that they can claim that they're standing up for you. They don't want to take any responsibility for the fact that they created those conditions in the first place.
Right.
A lot of people, when they've said to me over the years, why do you go so hard at the Democrats and not the Republicans? I would very often say, I don't blame the wolf for blaming the wolf, for being a wolf. I blame the sheepdog that was supposed to be guarding the hen house for taking a bribe from the wolf and opening the door.
Right.
That is what the Democrats did to labor. Now, the fact that you've got Tucker Carlson, who we know has the ear of Trump, has a big impact on the MAGAverse. Having O'Brien on there, who he's very likable. He's really a throwback to these old school union leaders. Those voices have almost been entirely shut out of the public square. And it's very revealing that you're seeing a reemergence of this labor voice, not through the Democrats, through the Republicans. Can you imagine can you imagine Joy Reid bringing him on and having a sympathetic conversation like this with him? That in and of itself tells you the Democrats and the Republicans really have changed place, at least rhetorically. Now, what we got to see going forward, I'll take yes for an answer. I'm not going to sit there and say, these fucking Republicans. Hey, man, I hope they're as good as their word. I have my doubts. He says a lot of good things about what he got from Trump and the interactions that he's had with Trump. He talks about Josh Hawley having gone out on the picket line for the Teamsters after he spoke to him, told him that right to work isn't good for his unions. Okay, man. I mean, we've talked about this for a long time. I wrote a whole article about how it's possible that eventually the Republicans are going to feel like, well, our base is the old Democrat base. We can't just keep doing Reaganomics. They're not going to stand for it. We're not going to be able to keep them in our coalition. We'll see.
Right. And also, don't forget, O'Brien did not end up endorsing Trump. He shopped himself around to see where he could get potentially the best deal for his members. And that involved speaking at the RNC. He wanted to then speak at the DNC.
He still describes himself as a Democrat.
Yeah, they would not have him. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, he didn't support Donald Trump. He didn't back Donald Trump. He just realized that the relationship with the Democratic Party had become so toxic that he had to at least shop around. He couldn't just give them the endorsement the way so many of these unions just fall in line without even thinking about it. It's it's predetermined at the beginning of the cycle. It's just a matter of when they're going to make the official endorsement. And so he shopped himself around, and the Teamsters members, the rank and file, voted overwhelmingly to endorse Trump, and O'Brien still didn't do it. He just made no endorsement in the cycle. But the reason why he made no endorsement and the reason why he spoke at the RNC is because the relationship with the Democrats had become what he just described there. And that's only the first part of it. Wait till you hear about his interactions with the Kamala Harris campaign.
Yes. All right. So I've got a little piece in between. Him and Tucker, they talked a little bit about social issues, about how, O'Brien talks about, and he says, and this is where you can see he doesn't want to completely leave the Democrats. He says to Tucker, look, I understand the social issues are important. I probably agree more with you on a lot of those issues, but I understand they're important. But in the end, people are worried about how they're going to fill their gas tank. They're worried about food at the kitchen table, and these Democrats. He's talking mainly about the gentrification of Boston and how it's gone all blue. But what does it mean? Their idea of politics is all social issues. He's basically critiquing that whole liberal identity politics thing. But then he goes on to talk about what the Democratic Party is today.
This party, once you go against them, they get so vindictive. The Democrats now are acting the way that they used to accuse the Republicans 20 and 30 years ago. And they basically become that Republican Party that they despised.
Intolerant.
Fell in love with corporate elitists.
Well, I know.
Right? Don't want to listen to their constituents. They want to dictate how people should vote and how people should think. And that's a problem. But prior to Biden dropping out of the
Okay, so it's very interesting to hear this from somebody who's the head of the largest union in the country, to describe himself basically being told to go get his fucking shine box. Because as voters, we get that vibe, right? That's what we always talk about. That the Democrats just expect you to fall in line. They expect you to serve them. They don't see themselves as being obligated to serve you at this point. Which he says almost exactly that at one point in the interview. Now, this is the thing that's really gotten the attention, and there's a little clip of it floating around, but it's worth watching virtually in its entirety. This story about his interactions with the Harris campaign is really amazing. So he talks about how they could tell Biden was missing a step when they brought him in for this roundtable that all the candidates were invited to, where they asked them 16 questions. Biden answered 5 of them. He says it seemed like elder abuse that they were doing to him. It was obvious that he was not really fit to be in that position anymore. But then he goes on to talk about their interactions with Harris.
Race. He's in the race around June or May.
All right, so this is Biden is still the candidate at this point.
But prior to Biden dropping out of the race, he's in the race around June or May. One of my vice presidents, a woman named Joan Corey out of my local, she sits on our general executive board, was at an event with Vice President Harris. And, they're going through the line to get the picture, and Joan introduces herself to Vice President Harris, says, "I'm Joan Corey. I'm on the general executive board for the Teamsters." She goes, "Teamsters? You better get on board. You better get on board. Better get on board soon." Says it to my vice president.
To her face?
To her face. So she comes back. We have the meeting the next day.
Damn.
And she tells me this.
I thought I was arrogant. That's really arrogant.
So she tells me this. So I call up Marty Walsh. He wasn't the Secretary of Labor, but, he was pushing hard for us to make the endorsement. I'm like, let me ask you a question, Marty. Excuse my French. Who does this fucking lady think she is? Like, if I want to support from any organization, I am not going to point my finger in someone's face and say, you better get on board or else. But that's the attitude of this whole party. So fast forward, she finally agrees to come after we were putting pressure on her, basically, because I was doing interviews all over the place saying, we haven't got invited to the DNC. They haven't accepted our invitation for her to come to a roundtable, so she comes to the roundtable. Same format, same questions. Rank and file members are asking her questions just like they asked every other candidate. And they were trying to negotiate with us. She only wants to answer 3 questions. We're like, there's 16 questions here. So she answers 3 of them. And on the 4th question, one of her operatives or one of her staff slips a note in front of me. This will be the last question. And it was 20 minutes earlier than the time that it was going to end.
Come on.
100%. And so, you're there trying to get our support. And her declaration on the way out was, I'm going to win with you or without you.
She thought that or said it out loud?
She said it out loud. The one difference between all the candidates that came was that at the conclusion of all these roundtables, we had media set up. So after conclusion of meeting with Trump, I did a press conference down in the lobby of my building. Well, Donald Trump did a press conference down in the lobby of my building after he spoke. The same offer was extended to both President Biden and Vice President Harris, and they refused. So you're meeting with the biggest labor organization that you want, and you've got an opportunity for media to question you about how you felt the meeting went and what you wanted to achieve, and you don't want to speak to the media. That's a problem. But Trump, to his credit, in our building, in our foyer, had a press conference.
I just want to issue one factual correction there because, you got to be honest. When he says, she said, we're going to win with you or without you, the actual quote was, we're going to win with you or without you.
Yeah.
That was the actual quote. Maybe he was just editing for time.
Yeah, she ran a perfect campaign, though, right?
Yeah.
She ran a perfect campaign. This conforms to all the stories we've heard about Kamala Harris from people who are not Republican operatives, from people who had every reason not to come forward and describe her as a psychotic fucking maniac, Democratic operatives who resigned from her office. What, she lose her entire staff twice? Her entire staff twice resigned from her office? That doesn't just happen. We have
like 90% turnover, yeah.
Yeah, we have stories about when she was attorney general from the father of one of the interns that worked for her, that when she walked in, they were under orders to stand up and say good morning, general, and not make eye contact with her in the office. Now, hey, if you heard a story like that in isolation, you'd say that's crazy. But when you look at all of these stories from credible people about Kamala Harris, it seems like she is really just an unbelievably incompetent and unpleasant, to say the least, person with a level of arrogance that is hard to contemplate in anyone who's gotten this far in politics, because it seems like she just pisses off everyone that encounters her. It's like this high-handed way of dealing with people. That's the pattern that you see in all these stories. Now, you worked in the vice president's office. You have a vested interest in not coming out and telling the truth because you want to work again, right?
Right.
You don't tell those tales out of school. These people had no personal motive to attack Kamala Harris that way. The fact that so many of them were so disillusioned and disappointed by their work with her that they came out and told the press about it, by not anonymously. That tells you what you need to know. This just reconfirms that we, whatever you think about Trump, and I don't think much of him, we dodged a big bullet not having that woman in the White House. God knows what that would have been like.
Well, the real difference on display too in attitudes, not only to O'Brien, but that is reflective of Kamala's attitude towards everybody. She wanted Joe Rogan to come to her. She wouldn't go to him. Right. Trump goes to Texas.
She made them build a set for her for Call Me Daddy for $100,000 instead of just going to the set.
Yeah, Kamala and the Democrats acted like they didn't have time for anybody. And that's the big difference. Trump acted like he had time for everybody and really tried to get as many votes from as many disparate groups as he possibly could, whether it was the manosphere or the crypto people or the unions. I mean, he tried to get O'Brien's endorsement. He didn't get it, but he worked for it. He put in the time. He acted like he had time. And this is partly a function of the fact that Trump is just an animal. He's just a machine. He hardly ever sleeps, right? I mean, he just has a ton of energy for a guy his age especially, but he's always Yeah. So it's partly he just has a lot of gas in that tank where he has 18 hours a day to deal with people, right? He's not like Biden who has to be asleep and takes a nap at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? That's a huge difference. The other difference is he took a much less arrogant approach to the campaign. He had time for people. He had 3 hours with Rogan. Kamala wouldn't do she was going to give him an hour if he came to her, right? Trump took a whole day. And this jibes with what people say about Trump, even people who hate his guts now. I remember Keith Olbermann.
He went to a rally late because of that Rogan interview. He was like 2 hours late.
Exactly. Right. He just had that time. He wanted to spend the time. Keith Olbermann said, when Keith Olbermann used to live in one of Trump's high rises, I think he used to live in like the Upper West Side high rises.
Yeah.
And Olbermann said, even after Trump ran for president, and Olbermann obviously did not support him, he said, I think it was on the Bill Maher show, I forget what interview he said, when I lived in the building, Trump knew I lived in the building. He knew I was a high-profile tenant, and he would ask me a lot. Was I happy with the building? Did I enjoy my time there? And he always had time for me. He never, it never seemed like he was blowing me off or listening with one ear. Like, he has interpersonal skills, and he actually pays attention to people when they talk. He's not just blocking them out. And that helped him tremendously this time. And, that was a strength that was the perfect foil to her weakness, because she acted the exact opposite way. She didn't have time for anybody. She showed no respect to anybody. How you can tell the Teamsters we're going to win with or without you? All your polls say you're losing. All the polls say you're losing. Your internal polls showed you losing worse than the public polls. Amazing. Oh, yeah, we're going to win with or without you.
Yeah. Even before she was the candidate, that first interaction he's describing, she was still the vice president.
She's still the vice president.
You better get on board.
Yeah, you better get on board.
Who the fuck acts like that if you're in politics. See, this is the irony of it. Whatever you feel about Trump, we just did a story about him just laying on total counterfactual bullshit about the Panama Canal. Right, about how many do you say died?
38,000. Yeah,
they're total
versus
bullshit.
about 1,000. So
Total
off by
bullshit,
a factor of
which
almost
might-
400%. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so but
4,000%.
do I think, as the media will often portray him, that Donald Trump is a sociopathic person? No, he doesn't read to me that way. She always did. I've
Right.
always said that about her. For
Right.
as long as we've had the show, I have put forth the theory I think she's a sociopath because her creepy, off-putting behavior is very typical of sociopaths. They can be very superficially charming, but then they'll say and do things that are off because they don't quite understand human emotion. They're faking it. They're faking an understanding of empathy. So they get it wrong sometimes. And that explains the
Yeah,
right. It's just weird, laughing at these weird off moments, not really understanding. You don't do that. Come on, man. Let's call it for what it is. She fucked an old man who was married to get ahead.
Right.
That's a certain kind of person. Okay, that was how she got ahead in politics. Fucking Willie Brown, who was what, 60? She was in her mid-20s.
Yeah,
I think he was 60, and he was married at the
Right.
time. You're willing to, oh, what? She was just drawn to Willie Brown? Come on, man. Like, if you're willing to do that to get ahead, what kind of a person are you? Now, it doesn't mean you're a sociopath per se, but I think when you put that together with all this weird behavior, it's just weird for someone in politics. Like, even if you're
Yes.
an unconscionable asshole, to not have the sense not to behave that way suggests a severe personality disorder to me. I think it's just beyond a bad politician. I think there's really, really something wrong with her. Now, again, I would really recommend watching this interview on the whole. O'Brien tells Tucker, I'm going to bring Jeff Bezos to his knees, which Tucker is very excited about. And he talks about how Bezos gets around paying the union or negotiating with the unions, the way they subcontract out the driving to third parties, but really they're clearly Amazon employees. All of this with Tucker's endorsement, no pushback. They seem to be on the same page, in agreement. O'Brien talks about how that labor pick, the labor secretary pick from Trump, was an example of him listening to him because that was who O'Brien wanted, and he told Trump that was who he wanted. So, hey, man, we're always fair on this show. I hope that his faith, I don't want to use the word faith, his hope that Trump will deliver for them. I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I hope it works out that way. I always say this. Hey, I remember what it was like seeing myself as part of a political party. And okay, my belief that I had some kind of control over the system was an illusion, which I came to realize. It would be so much easier to have a political party that's actually responsive to the needs of labor than to go out and build a whole new party. We understand how difficult that is. It would be great if it works out this way. We're not like resistant to Trump doing that or just going to beat up on him because it's content. No way, man. He does that. No one will praise what he's doing, at least in that area, more than we will. I hope O'Brien's hopes are realized.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tucker had Chris Smalls on when he was trying to, organize the ALU way back. That was in 2021. And, I mean, look, there's a bit of a, just like there is with Rogan, there's a bit of a nod along, like I hear you and I agree with you, and then you look at the next day, he's speaking, to Trump rally
and that's what I'm worried about.
Labor, right? Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That is my concern, and frankly, if I had to bet, that's my expectation.
Right.
Because who was he just having dinner with?
Right.
Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So is he really going to turn around and cross Jeff Bezos for Sean O'Brien?
Right.
I'll believe it when I see it, but if it happens,
well, yeah, axe to grind. Yeah, of course.
Sure. We will be the first to give him kudos for it. But it
All
was
right.
very interesting just in terms of, because we're talking about how much negative influence you're getting from the way that the MAGAverse responds to people like Andreessen
Right.
or people like Elon. It's nice to see Tucker, who has, I would say, at least as much influence with that crowd as Rogan does,
Oh, sure.
sit down with Sean O'Brien and treat him with respect and promote his issues as legitimate. That's a hopeful thing to see.
Please clap.